Hey everybody, it's Matt from Ride Hub here, and I'm one of the instructor trainers at the BICP. So I cover Canada nationally for them, and today what we're going to be doing is going through a quick bike check just to make sure that before you go for a ride, nothing's really wrong with your bike, and to make sure you're going to stay safe out there. So let's get started. First, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go from the front to the back of the bike, and this way it helps me keep things organized and makes sure that I actually have checked everything. Sometimes people use acronyms to remember, and I just find that for myself, it's easier for me to work from one end to the other. So I'm going to start with the front wheel. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check for pressure in the tire, make sure it feels like there's enough air in there. Sometimes people want to actually check how much air is in there. I can usually do this by feel. And when I'm doing this, I'm just making sure the tire's not leaking, right? If I come out and it feels really squishy, maybe I've got a problem with my tubeless setup or something's wrong with the tube. So I'm going to check that pressure. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hold the front end and I'm going to push the tire back and forth laterally. So what this is going to do is let me know whether or not maybe the front axle's loose, or if I have a quick release, if it's not done up tight enough. The other thing it might do is tell me if there's bearings that need replacing in the front wheel. So I'm going to feel for any sort of play there. If there's no play, I'm going to keep moving on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the front brake and I'm going to touch the top of the headset here where it connects to the frame, and I'm just going to rock the bike back and forth. And what I'm trying to do is feel for any play in the steering of the bike. If there's any play here, I'm obviously going to want to correct that before I go for my ride. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, right? Just at where the crown meets the frame. And again, no play, so I'm good to go. Next thing I'm going to do is just make sure I've actually got my stem nice and tight. So I'm going to straddle the front wheel, going to grab the front handlebar, and I'm just going to push back and forth while pinching the tire and make sure the handlebar isn't sliding from side to side on the stem. If that's the case, I obviously need to retighten all of this. Definitely not something you want to be going out for a ride with, a loose stem. As we move on, I'm going to make sure with that brake I can actually push the bike forward. The brakes seem to be grabbing and working properly. That's fine. I'm going to get myself now back to the middle of the bike where I've got my drivetrain. So the first thing I'm going to do is inspect my cranks. I'm going to just make sure there's no play in the crank, just laterally side to side. Maybe the crank needs to be tightened, or some of the preload has loosened off. So I'm just going to check back and forth. Then I'm going to move myself over to the chain components. Make sure there's no friction. Make sure the chain looks oiled. If I haven't oiled the chain or lubricated the chain in a few days, this might be the time to do it. You obviously don't want to over lubricate the chain either, so if the chain looks overly oily, I'm probably going to go in and clean that off. As I get to the back wheel, same thing. I'm going to check pressure. Everything feels good, and then I'm going to laterally check the wheel again. So this is going to tell me whether or not the rear axle is actually affixed on the bike, and if maybe I've got some bearing play in the rear wheel. The other thing that might happen here is it might actually present an issue with your pivots. So if something's wrong in your rear suspension, you might feel a knock. So you might have to move your hand around just to isolate where that knock is coming from. But this will typically present itself when you're trying to move that wheel back and forth. Once that's done, I'm going to go back up, grab the rear brake, and push to make sure the rear brake is actually working. There's one more really, really important thing we want to check before we go for a ride, and that's our helmet. So, when I grab my helmet, first thing I'm going to do is just give it a quick physical inspection, make sure nothing's happened. Maybe it fell out of a closet and somebody just put it back up on the shelf and I've actually damaged something. So I'm going to just take a quick look. The other thing I'm going to do is check to make sure my straps are set the way they should be. So these clamps are closed properly. And if you actually take a look, this one is really, really far down. And I've got some loose straps here. So I'm going to want to fix that before I actually go out for my ride. Then I'm going to test the fit, make sure everything's still fitting properly. And one question we get a lot of is, how tight should this be? The thing to think about is I want to be able to close this strap, and when it's nice and loose right here, I should be able to open my mouth. And when I do that, I should feel a tug on the top of my head. So the helmet should feel like it's pulling down a little bit on my head when I open my mouth. If it's already pulling down, and your mouth is closed, you need to loosen this strap a little bit. And if when you open your mouth, there's no tug on the top of your head, we're going to need to tighten that strap. And that's it. I'm now ready to go out for a ride. Okay, so go out, go ride your bike.